So I'm doing split toning. Um, so I think most people know how to get to this step where they select their photo and do develop. That part's pretty easy. Then if you look over here, you'll see your basic, tone curve, color, and split toning. So click down and select split toning. Pretty much what split toning does is it allows you to add color to either your highlights or your shadows, and it can also help correct um, like, you know how if your photo was a little bit orangey, you might use your white balance to fix something like, oh, I want it more blue, or I want it more yellow, or you want green. Split toning a lot of times can be used as kind of an alternative to that, and it allows you to have a little bit more control over what you're doing. Let's go back though. So that's why you would want to use split toning. So pretty much kind of how I like to do split toning. Usually I only use it for highlights, but I'll show you how to use it for both. What I recommend is kind of going to, or I'll just go to an extreme so I can show you how it works. So this is where you adjust the hues. So highlights, at this point it's at a very red hue. There it's a little more orange. And if you want to be able to see what that is, you can put your saturation up and you can see it in that little square. So like if I have my saturation at 100%, that's what the hue is. That kind of thing. Or if you want to be able to see it a little differently, you can click on that box and adjust the color you're using from there. Some people prefer that, it's a little bit easier. And it also adjusts the saturation at the same time. But you don't really have to worry about that. Like if I just said, okay, I usually like a blue tone for my highlights, so if I wanted that blue for my highlights, I'm not going to worry about what the saturation says there. I can adjust that later down here. But that's the blue tone I selected for my highlights. I put it at 100. And for my shadows, I'm going to keep them at a red tone just for the sake of demonstration. And I'm also going to put this at 100. So pretty much what it's doing is my shadows are all getting shaded red, and my highlights are all getting shaded blue. And like I said, you can adjust saturation here, that kind of thing. Balance. So this pretty much says what's considered a highlight and what's considered a shadow. So if I go all the way this way on balance, more things are being classified as shadow than highlight, so it's really shadow dominant. So most of it is going to be highlighted, or is going to be toned red, versus if I was to go up to all the way up here, then everything's being classified as a highlight and is being toned blue. So it adjusts kind of the balance of how focused one color is. But in the middle, that's kind of what would be considered normal. Put that back to 0. What I like to do, say if you just want to do it for your highlights, is I actually will adjust my balance, just because since I'm only doing it for highlights, and maybe I want not as much of it considered a highlight, and I'll say there looks good in what I want to be highlighted blue. And then from there you can adjust your saturation, so that would be without it at all. That's what my original image looks like. And then what I like to do is I like to put it all the way at 100 and then bring it back from there. I think it's easier and you can kind of get a better understanding of how much you're adding versus, and I find that I don't know, have a little bit more control. So I like the blue tone in that, and if you want to see what it looked like before, you can kind of go over here to this is how it looked like when I started, or what it looked like when I started. And this is what it looks like once I've added my blue split toning. So also for me, looking at that kind of helps me get an idea of how much I want to add. So I'm going to bring it down a little bit to more like that is how much blue I want. So now the image has kind of a blue tone to it. And you can see there it's adjusted to more of a gray blue because I've adjusted my saturation and that's showing me how it affected it. I'll go for an orange in my shadows. So I'm going to drag it over here, and that looks like a nice orange. Actually, it's a little greeny. There, that's okay. So, I put my orange there, and since I do have it pretty heavy on the shadow side, most of this is going to be orange. So I'm going to put it back to the middle since I am adjusting both and not just one. and put them both at 100. So this is what it looks like when I have both at 100 and the balance is at 0, so they're considered equivalent. I'm happy with the way that balance is. I think I might want to put maybe a little bit more highlight in there and less shadow because I want more of a blue tone. And then I'll start with bringing down my orange saturation because that's what I want, not quite as strong. So I'm going to put it at about 15, 16. And then I'm going to adjust my highlights accordingly. So I like the way my highlight looks about there-ish. So now my shadows have more of an orange tone and my highlights have a blue tone. And if we want to go back to what the original looked like, I'm sure there's a shortcut for this, but I just generally go for I'll click there. That's what my original image looks like. And this is what my new image looks like. So you can tell there's a bit more of a blue tone there. Some people like using this for, especially I find that for stage narrative stuff, it can be kind of fun and you can play around with it a bit. Maybe I want to bring this down a little bit so it's a little closer. Oranges a little bit too. So it's just really subtle, but it's also a good way for if you have something that you find is really orange toned and you don't, you want a cooler look to it, but you don't really want to use the white balance adjustment, so where you're adjusting the up here. This can be really helpful, especially because for some things it just looks better to use split toning or your white balance temperature. I find it's also helpful so if you just kind of hover over these and you look in this top corner up here, you can see how it changed. So when I changed the split toning balance there, it's super blue, that kind of thing. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll hold it over my original image and then pull it back so I can see the change in that little corner. And I noticed that I don't like quite how white the chip bag in the shirt is. If you look there, you can see, quite how blue it's become when I changed the split toning, but I like how it's adjusted the other things. So I'm just going to go to split toning and just bring it down a little bit so it's not quite as aggressive, maybe more like 15, and then I can go back and see the difference. It's not huge, but it's enough that I like it better this way. That's kind of, I guess, pretty much split toning for you. There's not much else to it, but it can be really fun, especially when you're using color. It's a fun tool to use.